Welcome to the College Knowledge Podcast, sponsored by the College Planning Network and Paradigm Financial Group. Whether you're searching for that right fit college, applying to college, or figuring out how you're going to afford it all, you're in the right place. You'll hear from deans, admissions counselors, student athletes, and scholars from esteemed universities and colleges around the country. We'll dig deep to uncover their insight and unique experiences. So whether you're a student gearing up for college or a parent with college-bound kids, sit back, relax, and listen. Like you, we have lots of questions. Our guests have the answers, and we're excited to share them with you. Let's get started. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to College Knowledge. I'm Dave Kozak.
And I'm Mr. Joe Kearns, also known as Joe the College Pro. Excited for this one today because I think we're going to have a nice conversation, a deep dive into college, maybe some inequalities that may exist, and a little bit more peeling back the layers to...
Yeah, I think it's an insight you can't get every day.
Yeah,
right?
Today's, I think, going to be a gold nugget episode, without a doubt.
For sure. Without further ado, guys, let me introduce Dr. Harry J. Holzer, the John Lafarge Jr. S.J. Professor of Public Policy at the McCourt School of Public Policy at Georgetown University. Dr. Holzer, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Give us sort of your quick version of run up to how you are where you are today.
Okay. I got my doctorate in economics. I won't tell you how long ago because it dates me. I'm a labor economist, and I've always been interested in the labor market, but particularly how more disadvantaged folks do in the labor market, how we can help them in a variety of ways. And of course, in an era where the importance of skills in the labor market has clearly grown, that leads you quickly into areas like workforce development, job training, things like that. And of course, the primary provider of workforce skills in the United States today is higher education. And that's done in one form in the four-year colleges and in a different form in the two-year colleges. I've been very interested in recent years in community colleges, which I think are a really fascinating institution because those colleges have to wear a lot of hats, some purely academic to help people transfer to four-year, but others really focusing on the workforce function and meeting the needs of local employers. That's been my interest. How does the higher ed sector in general, community colleges in particular, give people the skills that they need to prosper in the job market? And how might we help them do a better job? And what's the policy environment that we create for these colleges? And can we improve that as well?
Awesome. So my first question, currently we're seeing a large push, or at least I'm hoping for a large push back to U.S. manufacturing. Are we capable from a labor standpoint to have that push? And what is it going to take to get there?
The current administration is overselling the return of manufacturing. Every major high-income country in the world has been losing manufacturing. Even China's losing manufacturing these days. So we're not going to reverse that broad trend, and we shouldn't be trying to, because it would be so much more in a world where affordability has become a key concern of a lot of voters now and a lot of politicians. Trying to manufacture a lot of stuff in the United States would just make those products much more expensive, and that's not in anyone's interest. On the other hand, I think there are a set of manufacturing jobs, let's call it advanced manufacturing, that I think remains important for American workers. And I do agree with the view that there's a set of reasons why some manufacturing should be reshored. Some of that has to do with defense policy. Some of it has to do with access to the best chips and the best technologies for our economy and not being so reliant on one company in Taiwan. So I think there is a role for manufacturing, but I do think that the skills issue is very important. And when you read about the chip manufacturers that are building plants, the issue of where are they going to find skilled engineers and even skilled technicians, I think is a real challenge for them.
So the level of skill and education required for the advancement of technology and society, the economy, for lack of a better expression, it requires more education today to even do a manufacturing or labor job, does it not?
Yes. And really, to do almost any job at some level of pay that you might consider a living wage or a decent job is very hard. If you only have a high school diploma in America, it's very hard to advance in the job market, especially in a world where unions have been disappearing from the private sector, the federal minimum wage has really stagnated. You need some amount of post-secondary education. Some of that is in manufacturing are in the technical fields, building a skilled technical workforce, but some in a range of other parts of the service sector as well. So it's very important that more Americans get some post-secondary ed, specifically a version of post-secondary ed that has labor market value. Another one of the big problems in the US is that a lot of people go to college out of high school, don't really know what they want to do, and the dropout rate is very high. The labor market, if you go in for 1 year and you obtain at least some credits, the labor market rewards that, but not nearly as much as it rewards a credential, and a credential in a field where there's high demand and good jobs available.
The Wall Street Journal had a recent article that was saying the labor market is pushing the wrong majors. So just going to school to go to school may not be the actual answer, right? Because again, we hear these kids coming out with a ton of debt and can't find a job, whether it's the major they chose or it's just obviously things are always changing. But where do we have to, I think, take the education side of things to improve? Like, where do you see improvements needing to be made?
I think starting around 1980, the labor market premium for a college degree started to rise very rapidly. Between 1980 and 2000, it doubled the average earnings for a BA relative to someone with only high school. And I think you could say for a bunch of decades, if you could get a BA in almost anything, that was probably worth doing for the vast majority of people. Now, a lot of those people would go on to grad school and do really well, but most people with a BA did quite well. I think in the last, decade or decade and a half, the labor market has been a little less kind to young college graduates. Some people blame that on AI, and I'm sure we'll come back to that conversation later. We're not sure if that's the culprit. It's just a softer market, and the softer employer hiring has declined quite significantly since 2022 or so. We don't see big layoffs yet, but they're hiring less, and that's hitting young college grads. And I think we're at a point where young college grads do have to think about, what am I majoring in? What's the demand going to be for those skills in the market? There's an increasing trend towards something called last mile training. So you might go to college and get a degree in English literature, which is not a bad thing because it really improves your ability to think and write and communicate. But maybe you want to then get some very specific skills. And I think everybody's going to need some AI literacy. You need a solid foundation because you might prepare for a job that's in demand today. It might not be in demand tomorrow. So I think people also have to be ready to upgrade and to shift. Some people call this lifelong learning, and sort of college should give people a good foundation for that as well. Again, in the community college sector, I think that's where the workforce side of community colleges has to improve in its quality. And I've been doing a lot of work in that area. We got to think about that as well.
So I've always been very intrigued by the trade schools, the community colleges. My brother-in-law is an electrician, has an absolutely fantastic company. He does very well for himself. Never went to college, learned to pull wires through apprenticeship. And I read an article, and this will all tie together in a second, but I read an article last week, and this one had to do with the U.S. Navy and servicing the fleet in the U.S. Navy, the amount of electricians and electrical engineers required. We don't have them. They don't exist. There's 600,000 sort of needed to service just that, right? And that's not the buildings and the infrastructure and the homes and all that. When are the colleges, the four-year institutions, going to wise up and create programs that are like a 2-and-2 for a college degree where you get the actual physical knowledge of how to do electrical or HVAC or something like that, and then couple it with some business mind stuff so that they understand how to operate out there, how to negotiate things and move it along? Isn't there some melding of these two things that we could argue is maybe more valuable than just one or the other?
Yes, I largely agree with that. Now, I think the higher education, there's thousands of different colleges, the traditional not-for-profit sector and the for-profit sector. They don't all have to be the same. The elite colleges and universities, the flagship state schools, aren't going to do as much of what you just said because they have a different mission. They are really preparing people for graduate school or the jobs that require the most cognitive analytical work. I don't think the University of Michigan's or the Stanfords and Harvards are going to move in that direction, but some of them should, and certainly the community colleges should. Now, Another thing is it does raise this whole question of how do these institutions respond to the labor market and what's the incentive for them to respond? Some might argue that they're just interested in filling their seats. The faculty, especially if they have tenure, and of course I have tenure, so don't let me be too hard on this. Tenured faculty at a lot of these schools don't have a lot of incentive to adjust to a different role. So they might still be teaching the same stuff that they were teaching 30 years ago. Now, you can say in a world where there's a lot more data on how an institution's graduates doing in the labor market, if they're doing a really bad job, people are going to know that and they're not going to want to enroll. So they do have some incentive to get that right. But it's a slow process and there's a lot of entrenched vested interests in the way it's done today. So that's the issue. How do we strengthen those incentives? How do we assist them more in that process?
In just thinking logically through it, right, the incentive and the sort of the outcome should drive it. But I want to circle back to the AI and tie it all together, because if the pace of AI keeps up to what it is today, right, the version of Chat GPT that existed a year ago and versus today is wildly different, right? If some schools aren't making rapid adjustments, are they becoming obsolete at the pace that they're willing to play and change? We're seeing school closures, we're seeing schools shut down, the budgets don't hit, the people don't want to go.
So even before AI, we've been in a period of declining enrollments at the 4-year level and even more at the 2-year level, because people are starting to say, is college really worth it? I think the numbers say it is worth it if you finish, but a lot of people don't finish. And if you're in a field where there's some demand, AI is challenging because it makes it hard to know what's going to be in demand in 5 years. Employers might tell you we're still going to need this today. 3 to 5 years from now, AI might have changed and eliminated that demand. So it's very challenging. So people have to both study something for which there's some demand today, but at the same time have this strong foundation where they can build on their knowledge and shift whenever they have to. And we're just starting to figure out what that's going to look like. The colleges know, and especially the community colleges, they know they have to engage with their regional employers and talk to them a lot. But again, even the regional employers don't know what they're going to demand. So that's the issue. How do you give people that strong foundation? Everybody has to have some AI literacy, I believe, some knowledge of how it works. And economists have this concept called substitutes and complements. If you're a substitute with some kind of automation, is usually going to beat you and going to displace you. What you want to be is a complement, someone who can use the automation to augment your performance and your productivity. So I think everybody agrees with that in principle, but exactly what it means in practice, we're struggling together to figure out what's the best kind of preparation in that world. And by the way, another problem is, as I said, the institutions move slowly, they adjust slowly, especially on the 4-credit side. Again, community colleges are interesting because they have a 4-credit side, which is mostly academic, and they have a not-for-credit side. And some people think it's on the not-for-credit side that you can move quickly, nimbly in response to these changing labor market trends. So maybe that's how we evolve. And then there's this whole question of how do you build pathways from the not-for-credit stuff into the 4-credit stuff, and a lot of interesting innovation going on in that world. So we don't have the answers yet. And what role can public policy play in assisting that kind of transformation? But a lot of people are thinking about it and working on it.
Fascinating stuff.
You've mentioned community college a few times, and doing some research, you said it started to really intrigue you. And what are you seeing that is, I don't want to say different, but what has surprised you? What have you found through your research that's really been eye-opening and something you weren't necessarily aware of?
So we have about 1,000 public community colleges in the country, not counting the for-profits and all that stuff. My colleagues and I have developed a method of ranking community, and we're not looking at the liberal arts side and the transfer side. We're only looking at the kind of direct workforce preparation, which is healthcare, business, advanced manufacturing, IT, et cetera. What we found is that colleges are vastly different in their abilities to do that well. We've ranked all of them, like all that 1,000. We don't still understand why some are so much better than others, although when you talk to them, some of them think about it and worry about it a lot more and try a lot harder. Depends on the labor market, by the way. So the rural colleges just not that much of a labor market to even respond to, or the small towns. But frankly, some states seem to be much better at it than others, and they're not necessarily the states that I would have expected. I'm a lifelong Democrat, and I served in the Clinton administration. I will tell you, many blue states don't do as well on this workforce dimension as a lot of red states. A lot of the red states don't start with the philosophy that everybody has the right or the ability to get a 4-year degree. And I think they create a lot more incentives for their colleges, and fewer of the instructors have tenure, and the academic instructors don't dominate the institutions the way they do in a lot of the other states. So again, that's what's been a surprise to me. And by the way, the states that have a lot of technical colleges, Georgia, Wisconsin, Kentucky, a few of the others, they do this job very well. They know that this is their bread and butter. They're not worried about a transfer function. They know that their job is to serve the labor market and to keep up to date with whatever skills that market's requiring, and they do it well. So we're uncovered. But that to me is the biggest surprise, just how much better some institutions and some locations are than others at doing this.
When you're studying that stuff, are you studying the earnings potential, the earnings outcome, the post-grad? What are the major statistics that are needle movers for you in that type of research when you're talking about community colleges?
What you have to do is you start with the federal education data, and where you have what
like the iPads or
exactly, yeah, the iPads data, and which is based on institutions. So you look at each institution, you figure out what did people major in and what did they complete, and you have a code for what their major was, and then you have to what we call it a crosswalk or translate the education fields to the occupations, and then look at the occupations and their average earnings over time. That's the main mechanism we use, and see if the occupations are in fields where there's strong demand and high earnings for people without BAs.
Are you using like the ONET stuff, or does that ever come into play?
We are not using ONET. Some people do. I think ONET can play an important role in this whole thing of AI, because ONET tells people what tasks do you have to master to do your job, and AI is going to change those tasks. Presumably a lot. And the question is whether ONET's nimble enough to change quickly enough. We use census data on occupation earnings, and this translator, this crosswalk from education majors to occupations and earnings.
Fascinating.
Obviously, one question I wanted to definitely ask today was, being your knowledge of the labor market, and I guess nobody can predict exactly where we're going, but what should parents know? What should parents be thinking about that have high school students? What should high school students be thinking about? What are some of the things that maybe are overlooked that you're like, this is something every parent right now should be thinking about, and maybe you're not? When you're tying the college degree, the major choice, the school selection, what would you say to our listeners that are in that area that they need to know?
So that's a really important question. I do think high school is a very important time to prepare yourself for the rigors of higher ed. A lot of students go off to college not really prepared to handle the academics. So I'd say two things. Number one, find out what's needed to succeed at the set of institutions you're interested in, and make sure people are going to need strong academic background and the AP classes and things like that, but also some sense of where they might get employed. So like dual enrollment, I think, is becoming more important. So more and more of these high school kids get some actual college experience and get a leg up. And people who do dual enrollment appear to complete credentials more than the people who don't do it. Seems to give you a good leg up. But at the same time, start to think about possible careers, and what might give you a good foundation. People have long been asking the question, what about career and tech ed in high school? We used to call that voc ed. It was always pretty lousy. It didn't give you good skills for the labor market for a long time. I think for the last few decades, we've been trying to upgrade the quality. So we changed the name to career and tech ed. And there's a set of models where you try to blend really good academic preparation with some real labor market focus. So the career academies is a model where people go to a normal high school, they take their college prep, their AP classes, but they also study in healthcare or in finance or some key sector like that. There's different kinds of new pathway programs where you might work in an industry, again, while you're completing your studies. And some of those programs provide good pathways into the workforce side of community college as well. But again, people who are capable of succeeding at 4-year, you don't want to track them, but you want them to have a wide range of options, a good set of options that everybody can choose from. And if you think you can get the academic skills to excel in higher ed, by all means, focus on that. But maybe dip your toe and take a few career tech classes or internships just to find out what that route is like too. And again, so many students these days go to community college and they can't get past the first year, what's called the gateway classes. Then we need much better advising, both in high school and college. So students just have a lot more information on what it's going to take and where are you most likely to succeed. And giving yourself a broad base of skills so that you might be capable of shifting gears, I think is increasingly important. So there's a lot for parents to be thinking about.
Sure. I got a couple of things that I want to tie back to, but the last comment you made was about more advising. And we have a thriving practice and career because there aren't the advisors, there aren't the people to walk people through this. We've seen a decline in guidance from high schools, not because of the capability, but because of the ratio of people that need guidance to people that can give guidance. And it seems to me to be a line item on the budget that gets cut more often than it gets supported, which I think is counterintuitive to what we just talked about. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's very unfortunate because I think the more complicated the world, the labor market out there, the more dynamic the labor market, I think the more important good guidance becomes. And so I think these high school kids need a lot more of that. And I think you're right. Most high schools have a small staff of guidance counselors. And then they get very traditionally into this. You need to check off these boxes if you want to go to college. I think students also need more career information.
Sure.
Career education. Just what does the labor market look like? The good paying jobs look like this? What skills do you need to have? I think they need more guidance. Community colleges, they're often so strapped for resources. There's evidence that guidance is really critical. So after the first semester or two and someone's floundering because they can't pass anatomy or physiology in a health, what can they fall back on? Now, there's also some guidance to be obtained at the one-stop shops that the labor department funds. Now they're called American Job Centers. They have guidance too about careers. They're also very, very strapped for money. But I think guidance is becoming more and more important. As AI jumbles up the labor market, those guidance counselors will need to be up to date. And I think their role is important.
Yeah, it's interesting because this is, I don't know, 180th episode, something like that.
Yeah.
And every single person we've ever talked to on this show, whether they're high-ranking officials at schools, whether they're experts in the field, whatever they are, they've always talked in some fashion or another about the mentors that they've had in their life that got them where they are, that pushed them to do different things or take a pathway, and how important that was for them. And all of a sudden, this version of mentorship is declining, as opposed to, if so many people who are so successful have said the mentor was the one that got them there, then shouldn't that be the focus of what we're doing in mentorship? And then we always encourage everybody, like, find the mentor on campus, latch on to the people that you see that can help you and learn from them, be a sponge in that. But just thoughts on the idea of the mentorship.
I think that matters as well. So that's different than guidance. Like the guidance is by trained professionals with knowledge of these pathways. I think mentorship is also important. How do you help people find mentors is an interesting question. Higher ed is never usually worried about that. Maybe one of the ways you do it is through work-based learning options, apprenticeships, internships, things like that. And in those businesses, people can find a mentor. Maybe those people can play that function.
Sure. You made a point earlier that I just want to go back to. I went to Franklin and Marshall and I studied economics, and I had a professor, William Weitzel was his name, brilliant man, tough professor. My freshman Econ 101 class was in macroeconomics, was writing intensive. And the first day of my college career, he said, our job as professors is to teach you how to learn, period. And he said, if you graduate from this school and you can learn for the rest of your life, you will find your success. And that always stuck with me. And F&M's a known liberal arts institution. It's a great school. It was a pain in the butt to get out of, but I did it in 4, and here we are. You made a point about if we can really teach you how to learn in higher ed, now your lifelong learning capability exists. Is that not the mission? And are we seeing schools move away from that mission? You hear about all indoctrination and whatever it may be, but like, how are we doing on the teaching that lifelong learning environment on a broad base in this country?
It's so important, and it is one of the foundational skills for all the learning you'll have to do later. I think it's something that we've struggled with in secondary school, in higher ed, because again, it's so much easier for instructors just to fall back on, I'm going to stand here and lecture and spoon feed you a bunch of facts that you need to learn, rather than, I don't know how many people know how to teach people to think. Like, for instance, the law schools and many others that teach their students Socratically, a Q&A method. That's what what they're doing. They're teaching people how to think. And I think in higher ed, we certainly need to do more of that, and maybe in high school as well. So it's not like these are the three principles, but you're doing it. You're actively thinking and learning how to think, and learning what are the questions to ask. What does critical thinking entail?
Yep.
We know critical thinking is one of the 21st century skills. Even in an AI world, it will likely remain very important because you don't know if the AI gets the answer right. You still require that kind of judgment and critical thinking. How do you teach that?
How does the teaching to the rubric, and I got very frustrated with my children's education. I have 4 of them, and there came a point in the spring where they had to learn this TDA. It's a text dependent analysis. And they spend the entirety of the spring basically preparing because they're going to have a TDA on the statewide exam. And so all they're doing is teaching them like this sort of process, but not this thought pattern that goes into that. Do we need a revolution in that mindset to really create that critical thinking environment that I think is going to be more necessary than ever with the advent of AI? Because people are believing stuff that is unbelievable. When you go on AI and you see it, you're like, oh my God, you see that whale jump out? And you're like, dude, that's not real. Like, that's fake. But we don't have the critical thinking capability to do so.
I think you're right. And I think whether you call it critical thinking or even just judgment, in a world where AI is going to create both information and disinformation and misinformation, just having that ability to make good judgment about what you believe and what you still need to know. And AI is rapidly replacing the really basic skills of reading and summarizing the facts in any article, but then taking whatever that information is, figuring out A, is it correct or not? And how do I verify? And then B, what does it mean? And what is the best choice to make? Yeah, I think those will be more and more important in this world.
I appreciate you indulging my just random thoughts.
Funny, we were talking about this, my daughter last night, and we were just talking about critical thinking, and she was like, yeah, well, you can't trust anything that's on Wikipedia because anybody could put anything on there. And I was like, okay, where did you learn that? And she was like, anything that's on the internet, like you have to question. She's 11. I said, all right, was AI now getting us? Because it used to be if it was on the internet, it was true. And there wasn't much looking into, and now it's almost shifting. There is so much that is not real that it's almost coming to light that people that are looking at it are like, yeah, almost everything is fake. Now I have to verify. I'm like, it's not a bad way to look at it. Prove anything you read, double check it, see where the resources come. My 11-year-old daughter saying this. I'm like, all right, maybe there is hope for the future.
I think AI is going to provide a lot more of that kind of disinformation, and that ability to separate the wheat from the chaff is going to become more and more important.
Yeah.
One important question, I think you've talked a lot about the labor market. Your research has been in the labor markets. What can parents, students do to sort of look forward in the labor markets, and how can they research on their own like a good outcome choice to make maybe 10 years prior to when it's going to suit them?
One of the good news developments, I think, is that there's a lot more data on how much money people make in different fields and how much money each institution's graduates make. And most states are starting to make that data available.
Okay.
So you go online for every institution and say, okay, if you got a BA or a BS in engineering at this school, what were the average earnings? So the data are becoming more available. I think people will need help accessing those data and interpreting them. And that goes back to the guidance issue. And we train more people to help parents and students read those data and make good judgments. But yeah, at a minimum, that's a question people should be asking. And just the notion that that's a relevant question. I did a study for a community college institution with some other people. We just went out and interviewed 20 or 30 students at this community college. And you said, well, how do you think about what's a good job? And they didn't know even fundamentally that you should look at the earnings and outcomes. They say, well, my uncle has the job and he seems to be pretty happy. So just telling people that's something you ought to be thinking about and pursuing, I think, is very important.
Yeah, we often call it the return on investment.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
In our world.
That's a good economics phrase.
Yeah. My last question is, you've mentioned throughout today's episode, hey, the worst thing that can happen, you start, you don't finish. If you go to college, you finish. People that couldn't get past the gateway classes first year. Are there any specific reasons that you're seeing that people don't finish college? And is there anything that parents should, hey, this is something we need to make sure we can avoid? If we're going to go, we're going to finish. But what are you seeing as the reasons, and what do parents need to make sure they're looking at to not be one of those statistics?
Number one, people come with really weak foundational skills. They haven't learned that set of underlying skills that you need to succeed in college. So doing a good job on your academics before you get there. Number two, perhaps one of the very biggest predictors is whether or not students are parents by the time they go, and especially if they're single parents and they have to work. If you have to work full time while you're in college, it's much, much harder to make progress and to finish. Try not to become a single parent if you're going on to college. And if you are, try to find some kind of work-based learning, work-study program where you can study and learn at the same time. And then 3, try to get some of that guidance to make sure you're on a path that you can finish. And let's help them get that information by making a lot more of that guidance available.
Awesome stuff. Awesome. Hey, we appreciate your time. This is a great conversation. So much insight. I've got all kinds of gold nuggets to reflect on here. So thank you very much, everyone. This is Dr. Harry J. Holzer, again from Georgetown University, dropping knowledge, college knowledge
That's
to be
right.
specific on what you should think about as you look forward to your career path and how to match it with your higher education. Dr. Holzer, thank you so much.
Thanks very much. I really enjoyed it.
This is great to talk to you. Tune in to our next episode of College Knowledge. And until then, stay safe, stay strong, stay sane.